All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. We know it is Tuesday evening for everybody, so we don't want to take up your time if you've got other things planned. We do appreciate everybody coming to join us. Today, the staff of Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever Illinois will be talking about how to identify invasive plants and to combat these invasive plants. This is one of the most common issues that we see when talking to landowners about their habitats and problems that they might have. So we're going to be talking about those because right now is a great time to be making a plan to start fighting those or actually going out and combating them. We do have several biologists on the call today. So if you are having any questions, we do ask that you use the chat feature, which Dallas just put a chat into. If you message your questions in there, we'll have our biologists not only answering the questions in there, but we might bring them up online and discuss them at the end if we haven't been able to answer them in the chat. My name is Katie Kozler-Stockman. I'm the Illinois State Coordinator for Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. Tonight, we're going to be having one of our Farm Bill biologists, Ashley Darson, presenting. And we do have several biologists throughout the state of Illinois. We will be having some more positions come on in the next few weeks. We are getting ready to do the interview process to fill some of our vacancies. But our biologists are actually, they work out of the USDA offices to do work with private landowners. So I would strongly suggest, if you haven't utilized our biologists before, if you visit our website, www.ihuntil.com, so ihuntillinois.com, and check out our technical map or our contacts. You'll see the biologists in the counties that they're assigned to. If you don't have a biologist in your county, we do suggest to reach out to the closest one, and they might not be able to do a site visit, but they'll still be able to provide some technical assistance and help you out with some of your habitat questions. So without further ado, I am going to turn this over to Ashley and have her teach you guys about some invasive plants in Illinois.
So hi, like Katie said, I'm Ashley Dawson, a Farm Bill biologist in East Central Illinois with Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you guys are all enjoying this nice Illinois weather that we're having. I'm having snow here, but I'm hoping that soon enough we'll be back to spring conditions and we can all get outside, and hopefully by then you guys will know something about how to identify some invasive plants and how to combat them, because that's what I'm here to teach you today. Hang on. Doesn't look like, there we go. So I wanted to talk a little bit first about the impact invasive species have. So most people don't know, but the invasive species in the United States cost us $138 billion annually in damage and control costs. And of that $138 billion, almost $40 billion is agricultural impacts, so crop and forest production losses. I also wanted to explain a little bit about the difference between exotic versus invasive species. So dispersal of species to new regions is a natural process that has been going on pretty much for as long as there's been life on the planet Earth. Of course, we know about continental shift and all of that, the opening of different land bridges. So species have been moving around on their own for a really long time. But now that humans have airplanes and ships, species are moving faster, further, and in greater numbers. Hang on. Don't quite know what's going on. Give me a minute.
Ashley, would it help if I brought it up on my screen and you just told me when to do the next slide?
Yeah, I don't like roses came over from Europe, and those species are just that outside the human activity. They're really not a threat to anything. Most of the time, without human care, they wouldn't really survive. Invasive species, on the other hand, spread rapidly. They displace native species and they negatively alter their new habitat, usually by making it impossible for anything but themselves to grow there. An example of invasive species I've got a little picture of here is the burning bush. It has this really distinctive winged stems. And this is a species that is an issue more up north, especially like in the northeast of the United States. And now, we don't really know which exotic species that we bring to the US are going to become invasive species, and our understanding of that can change over time. Really, normally the number of invasive species that become invasive is very small compared to the number of exotic species that we've introduced over the years. An example of an exotic that just recently we had to start treating like an invasive is butterfly bush, especially in the eastern United States. They had originally told people to plant butterfly bush because it's a good species to have for pollinators. It provides them with nectar. However, in the past few years, it's started to be naturalized in certain areas. They're finding it in places it shouldn't be. And so now we're starting to advise people to plant other native shrubs that provide pollinator food in its place, so we don't have an issue with it becoming an invasive. Katie, if you can move on. All right, so there are a lot of different invasive plant species in Illinois. Today I'm going to talk to you about mostly the ones that we encounter the most when we're doing upland habitat restoration work here in Illinois. I'm basically going to work my way down from the canopy to the herbaceous layer. So we're going to start out with trees and move on to shrubs and then through herbaceous plants here. You can move on to the next slide. So the first plant I'm going to discuss is this tree, black locust. Black locust is a plant that likes to invade disturbed regions, old fields, degraded woods, roadsides, and it also likes to come up in a lot of warm season grass plantings and pollinator plantings. This is actually a tree that is native to the eastern United States, and it's actually useful there. You can make great fence posts out of it. It's a good wood to have. But when people moved west, they brought it along with them. And unfortunately, where it does well in the eastern forest, it has competition. Out here in the prairie, it doesn't really have competition. And so it will grow up and shade out all of our native plants. We don't want it to do that. It grows really quickly. It can grow to about 100 feet tall. The seedlings are really easy to identify. You can see in this picture in the background, this is a picture I took of actually one of the first sites I ever went out to as a farm bill biologist here in Illinois. And the guy had just a ton of young black locust seedlings. You can see they're really thorny, they're really scrubby. They don't really look like anything you'd want to go through. So when you see them out there, it's really obvious sort of what they are. And in case for whatever reason you can't tell from the thorns on them, the leaves are really like this what I like to think of as the legume shape. Of course, legumes are like peanuts and peas, are native prairie clovers. So if you've ever seen the leaves on any of those, you know sort of what the leaves of black locust look like. They're just bigger. They also have seed fruit pods, and they make pods, which is pretty unusual. As far as native species go, we don't really have many that do that. Mowing and burning are only effective in reducing the further spread of young shoots. And we really haven't had a lot of luck with mowing black locust. If you have a lot of young black locusts coming up, the strike team guides have told me here in Illinois, usually that means there's a large black locust tree somewhere around nearby that's causing all those seeds to be made. And so what you really want to do is get rid of that tree as much as you want to get rid of these younger shoots. So you can do a cut stump treatment, basically, where you cut the tree off near the ground and you would apply this glyphosate water solution, which is from mid-June to August is when you would do that. And it's like a 6.25 glyphosate to water, which comes out to like 15-to-1 water to glyphosate ratio. We can move on. Okay. So this is another tree that's an invasive, and it is very poorly named. They call it tree of heaven, but those of us that work in habitat restoration like to think of it as the tree from hell. This likes to colonize again fields and old, usually old fields and edges of forests and that kind of thing. And it produces a huge amount of seed to do that. It also can sprout from its root system. And it produces toxins. It's allelopathic, which means it really poisons the ground around it and makes it impossible for other species to survive. It can grow to about 80 feet. And the bark of the trunk on a larger tree is really smooth, which is something you don't see in a lot of native trees. And so that's one way you can ID it. It has these really big, 1 to 4 feet long feather-shaped leaves. And it gets these really obvious flowers. In fact, those will be happening shortly. And the male and female trees produce different ones. You can see either, flowers or seeds, depending on if it's male or female. The main way, though, to identify tree of heaven is just to break a branch off of it and smell it. Because if you've ever opened a jar of peanut butter that's gone bad, that is what tree of heaven smells like. If you take a whiff of it, you'll be like, oh, yuck, because it is really obvious. And so tree of heaven does resemble some of our native trees like black walnut, ash, particularly sumac. So if I'm out in the field and I'm like looking at something that's young and I can't really tell, and I'm thinking, is this sumac or is this tree of heaven? The way I do it is just to break a stick off of it and smell it. And you will definitely be able to tell the difference. We can move on to the next slide. You can kill tree of heaven seedlings with prescribed fire. But you can also hand pull seedlings when the soil is moist, but you have to be careful to remove all the roots because, again, they do grow back from the roots really easily. Repeated mowing of small plants can exhaust that root system, but larger plants, you shouldn't really cut those because they'll just produce a lot of new sprouts. It won't really kill them. You can apply this triclopyr, which is Garlon basically, or glyphosate, which is Roundup, in water as a foliar spray during the growing season and before the fall leaf color change. For trees that are smaller, so like 6 inches or less in diameter of the trunk, you can use a basil treatment, again, of the Garlon, or you can also kill larger trees by girdling them and applying an herbicide directly into the cut surface. And that's best done from early summer until early winter. Now we can move on to the next one. So this is our main invasive shrub here in Illinois. This is autumn olive. It is one of the most common, just toughest and nastiest and worst one. And it's really hard to get rid of. This is, like I said, it's a shrub, so it's like a really bushy thing. It can grow up to 15 feet tall. It likes any place it can get just a little bit of sun. So fields, old pastures, it's really common in. Any place like along roadsides. If you've ever been driving on the interstate, I assure you've driven past a ton of autumn olive. Forest edges and open woods. It leaves out really early in the spring. It was one of the first plants you could see come up in the spring this year. And the new leaves on it are bright silver. And that's one of the best ways to really be able to identify it. Because even when the leaves mature, they become this olive green color on the top of them. But on the undersides, they still have that silver color. And so from a distance, even, you can really, once you develop sort of the image of what an autumn olive looks like, you can see it very easily, even from long distances away. They do get creamy yellow flowers, as you can see on here on the bottom left. The flowers have 4 petals, and in the fall they get a huge amount of red berries. which are beloved by wildlife. They're kind of like junk food for wildlife. And so that is another way that autumn olive spreads all over the place, because animals eat it and then they move, they do their business somewhere else, and that poor place gets autumn olives. And they do often have small thorns on them. And I have heard reports from other people working in habitat restoration that they've had problems with getting stuck with the thorns and having swelling and infections. So if you are going to work on these, be careful of that. And we can move on to the next slide. Autumn olive was sort of the fault of early conservationists. They recommended it for wildlife habitat because it did fruit so heavily, and the fruit is edible for wildlife. It's even really edible for people, honestly. It's really high in lycopene, and it tastes a lot like really tart cranberry. My mom makes a really great autumn olive fruit leather. But it was really in this area a lot used to regenerate strip mining sites because it thrives in poor soil. It has this really deep root system that can reach down deep into the ground and pull up nutrients where other plants can't. It's difficult to control because of that, and it's almost impossible to eradicate because it is such a tough plant and it's so well adapted to survive pretty much anywhere. So the best way to get rid of it is to use a combination of methods. It can survive prescribed fire pretty much just fine. I have read that goats are an effective control method if you don't want to use herbicide, but you're going to have to graze that area of the autumn olives heavily in spring and early summer for several consecutive years. And of course, if you have desirable plants that you're trying to protect, then grazing in those areas, your goats are going to eat everything else too, not just the autumn olives. You can kill or cut back autumn olive shrubs. The best time to do that is mid-July, because you want to get them before they get those thousands and thousands of seeds out there into the guts of your birds and your deer and everything. Hand pulling will really only work for the really tiny guys because, again, it has that really deep root system. You can use like a weed wrench or a root talon to pull up ones that are a little bit bigger. But to pull large autumn olive shrubs, you're gonna need like a heavy duty tractor with a chain or a tractor bucket. And even then you're probably gonna have some resprouts that you'll need to treat with herbicide. We can move on to the next slide. So there's several different herbicide methods. You can use the cut stump method that can be used pretty much at any time of the year. Except during the spring growth. And that's, again, you just want to cut or saw all the stems just several inches from the ground, and then you want to spray that with herbicide immediately. And you would use glyphosate or triclopyr in water, which is, again, Roundup or Garlon. For the foliar spray method, you would need a higher concentration of foliar herbicide than is effective for most other plants. You would need, and that would really only work for plants that are less than 6 feet. And the best time to do that is early spring or late fall, because that reduces your collateral damage. So basically you want to hit these at the time of the year when they're just starting to leaf out and your other native plants aren't up yet, or they're still actively photosynthesizing when your other plants have gone dormant at the end of the year. For the basal bark treatment, you can apply the Garlon again to plants that are 6 inches or less. And that's most effective January and February, or from May to October. We can move on. Okay, this is multiflora rose. This is probably one of my most hated invasives, honestly, because my first ever internship I did way back when I was just starting to become a biologist student at university, I went out and did a wetland floristic study. I was an assistant on one, and I think I walked into every single multiflora rose bush there was in that several hundred acre wetland. For something that doesn't move around, it seems to be really capable of catching people. It infests many different kinds of habitats. You can find it in woodlands a lot, but also it likes fields just fine. So this was another one that will come up if you do any kind of warm season grass or pollinator planting. The flowers are white, which is a really good thing to remember. And the most obvious thing about it is it's got these thorns that really resemble a cat's claws, and they like to hook into people, and they will go right through clothing. Believe me, I know. These usually occur in pairs, and those are really the best ways to tell it apart from our native Illinois roses that we have. We do have a couple native Illinois rose species, but they have pink flowers, and their thorns are straight. They don't have that curved hook on them, and they're mostly more like bristly spines. Can move on to the next slide. Yep, so multiflora rose was another one that was recommended back in the 1930s by the Soil Conservation Service, which was kind of like the prelude to the NRCS, to help with the erosion issues that they were, of course, having at that point in history. And, it was recommended for doing hedgerows and that kind of thing. And unfortunately, it expanded far beyond what it was meant to do. A large multiflora rose can produce thousands of seeds, and those seeds can remain in the seed bank for up to 20 years, which of course makes controlling this difficult. Again, this is another one where using several different methods together can be often your best bet. And you're probably going to have to repeat those 2 or 3 more years at least to make it work. Prescribed fire will kill like the stems and the seedlings. Older plants will grow back, but prescribed fire is a good method if you have like a huge patch of this, you can't get in there to treat it. So you can burn it down some, clear it out, and then you'll be able to reach it to apply an herbicide. Goats can again be used here. If you graze, again, several consecutive years, and again, you're going to have the issue of potentially they eat everything else too, not just your multiflora rose. The herbicide methods are the same for autumn olive. Mowing 3 to 6 times a year for at least 2 years may kill or greatly reduce the numbers of autumn or multiflora rose. And where mowing would destroy native plants, you can cut the stems to the ground 3 or more times a year and repeat for several years. Move on to the next one. So we have 2 different invasive honeysuckles here in Illinois. And the southern regions, you see more of the Japanese honeysuckle, which is a vine. It likes to climb all over trees. It'll just engulf forest edges and that kind of thing, fields and fence rows. And we also have the Amur or bush honeysuckle, which likes the more northern regions, and that is it's a shrub. And it likes to thrive in woods and forest edges. It'll also move into grassland areas, though. So both of these have these whitish, pinkish, tubular flowers. I'm sure some of the older people will remember when they were kids sucking the juice out of the Japanese honeysuckle. So kind of got an idea of what those flowers look like. The Japanese honeysuckle flowers, as they age, they do turn yellow. The bush honeysuckle ones stay white. They both have these long oval leaves. The Japanese honeysuckle leaves can sometimes look kind of like an oak leaf. Japanese honeysuckle has blackberries. The bush honeysuckle has red ones. The best way to ID this is really just go out in the early spring when all the leaves are still off the trees, and you can look around in the woods, and if you see a big patch of green stuff, that is almost always going to be like bush honeysuckle. We can move on. Yep. Again, there's several methods to treat this one. Mechanical removal is possible. You can pull young plants by hand, especially when the soil is moist. They come up pretty easily. You can mow for the vine because it does like to do this spread across field areas and such. The only issue with that is, of course, if you're mowing like in a warm season grass field, you're gonna also kill off your native plants that you're trying to protect. In order to use herbicide, you can sever the vines or the bushes near the ground and treat the cut ends with either Roundup or Garlon mixture with water. There's you can also apply a foliar herbicide such as glyphosate or triclopyr. And if you time it right, that'll effectively control the honeysuckle. And the best time to do that is actually autumn and early winter. That's because most of your native plants have gone dormant at that point. But it's before a hard freeze, so the honeysuckle is still photosynthesizing and still taking up nutrients, which means it'll also take up that poison and die. You can use prescribed fire to kill seedlings, but it won't really work on larger plants. It will control top growth though, and it may stunt it for at least a year. Oop. Can we go back? Forward one. Thank you. So tall fescue is another huge issue in our prairie plantings. A lot of the times it comes in because people start mowing, and that just really promotes the growth of these cool season grasses versus your warm season grasses, which really don't work very well if you're mowing them repeatedly. We also have meadow fescue in this area, which is pretty similar to tall fescue. As I said, it's a cool season grass, so it tends to like to out-compete our native warm season grasses. And there's really no easy way to identify grasses. I've been doing this for several years now, and it's still really hard to ID grasses. One of the things about tall fescue is the mature flowering structure on it can have this purplish cast, which can help you distinguish it sometimes. But the best thing to do is just if you look down at the bottom of this picture here, I've got sort of like a silhouette of what the seed head looks like on it, and that's pretty common. Pretty much if you see anything that looks like that out in a field, it's probably fescue, just because it is so incredibly common here in Illinois. A prescribed burn in late spring will help eliminate young plants in an area that's only lightly infested. And you're probably gonna have to burn for 2 to 4 years to achieve a good control of that. Even as far as areas that are heavily infested, like a lot of these old farm fields you see that people want to put into native habitat, they're just covered in fescue. The really Roundup is the best. It's the most commonly used treatment method for that, because it's pretty much the only thing that works on heavily infested areas. Now, of course, recently there's been some changes. We've been told that glyphosate may not be as safe as it once was thought to be. So I looked around to see if there were any other alternatives. I did find reference to this Fusilade 2000 as an alternative herbicide for people that may not want to use Roundup. But as far as having spoken to anyone who's actually used it, I have not done that. So I can't guarantee how it would work. All right. Garlic mustard is another invasive that we just see a ton of. It pretty much likes to grow everywhere. It will grow in areas that have been disturbed, in areas that aren't disturbed. It likes sun, it likes shade, so you'll see it in the woods, you'll see it along field edges. It has these really big kidney-shaped leaves, and they have these really deep veins in them. They look almost like they've been quilted. It grows to a height of about 1 to 1.5 feet. And it's usually the tallest plant on the forest floor, like around May. So, you know, in a couple weeks, if you go out there and you see something that's starting to sprout up into a tall stem and it's starting to get flowers on it, that is probably garlic mustard. It has these little white flowers that clump together on the stalk at the top of the plant. This is an invasive that was brought over by, you know, the first European settlers. It was a medicinal culinary herb for them. They brought it from England, where it was fine. It had native predators over there. You know, stuff would eat it, but pretty much nothing likes to eat it here in the United States. So it just spreads everywhere, and it even exudes this cyanide containing toxin into the soil, which kills anything that gets near it. So pretty much once you see the stalk go up, it's pretty easy, like I said, in May to ID it. So you can pull it by hand. What I would advise you to do, though, is if you do pull these by hand, don't leave them laying on the ground. Take them away with you, because if they even just started to make seeds, they will continue to make seeds even when they're dead. They're like zombie plants. A prescribed fire in late spring may kill seedlings and reduce the number of flowering plants, but because that's just going to clear the soil, what you're going to probably have is just some more garlic mustard emerging from the seed bank. So following up with an herbicide treatment can help exhaust that seed bank faster. And you can spot spray for these, because you don't want to normally spray everywhere, but you can just spray the spots that you see coming up with, again, glyphosate or Garlon anytime the ground is not frozen, pretty much. And so we have several thistles here in Illinois. I wanted to talk about Canada thistle, which is an invasive thistle. And it's probably one of the worst invasive thistles, because it likes to form these dense patches in sunny fields and open areas. And it spreads really extensively through this creeping root system that moves around under the ground. It has these, purple to pink flowers, and they turn into these big white puffy things that give off seeds that can remain viable for over 20 years. They grow about 3 to 4 feet tall, and they're really spiny. They have a lot of spines on the leaves and stems. As far as control methods, we do not recommend tilling at all, because for Canada thistle, all those little root pieces that you till up are just going to grow new plants, because it'll spread through rhizomes. Repeated pulling, cutting, or low mowing throughout the growing season, you can weaken those. Prescribed fire is also an option. Late spring or early during the growing season is the best time to do a prescribed burn if you're trying to get rid of Canada thistle. And you can apply glyphosate, clopyralid, or aminopyralid during the early flowering stage. So I put this together just to show some of the differences between our invasive versus our native thistles. So Canada thistle to me always looks kind of grayish. If you see it out in the field, it's kind of got this grayish tint to it. The flowers kind of have this grayish tint compared to other purple flowers, and they are smaller than any of the other thistles that you'll see. Then we have bow thistle here in Illinois too. Bow thistle is actually easier to control than Canada thistle, because it doesn't have those rhizomes. It doesn't spread under the ground through its roots. And bow thistle has this really big cup at the base of its flower, and the flower is larger, and it's more of a brighter purple. And then we do have native thistles here in Illinois, and we'd appreciate you if you didn't kill your native thistles thinking they were some horrible invasive thing. Tall thistle is one of them. You can see a picture of it here. And the main thing to remember about your native thistles is their stems are spineless. So if you see something with some nasty spines growing on it, normally that's like bull thistle. If you see something that doesn't have any spines on it, it could be a native. And also the undersides of their leaves are really white. All right, did anybody have any questions?
All right, so I did not, since I was on thing, I did not see I did not see any questions in the chat come up. So we did record this. We are going to post this onto our YouTube page, and we will share the link with everyone after this evening. Probably about tomorrow morning is when we'll have that go up. Now, we do encourage you guys all to utilize our Farm Bill biologist. That is what they're here for, is to help private landowners, is provide technical support. So we do encourage you to visit www.ihuntil.com. this springtime is a great time to do certain invasive species. It's the best time to be out managing them right now, but it is a good time to also start planning for some of those falls, especially if you do have some of those shrubs like the honeysuckle or the autumn olive. And we can definitely help out with that, giving you a plan, giving you recommendations about what to do to fight those. But we do appreciate you guys coming in this evening and with us. And oh, there we go. There's Ashley's contact information. Our other biologist's contact information, which you're seeing the bottom right-hand corner of that slide. That is our website, ihuntil.com. We do have 4 biologists currently. We will be doing interviews in the beginning of May to hire on another 3 or 4 additional positions. So if we don't have a biologist in your area right now, we may have your counties covered soon. And if we do not have a biologist covering your county, we recommend to contact the biologist that is closest to you. So thank you again once to everybody for coming on tonight. And thank you for supporting Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever of Illinois and all the great habitat work that you guys do on your property. Have a great evening and thank you again.